A powerful message. We'll discuss that with our political panel. Joining us now, Robert Costa is our chief election and campaign correspondent. David Becker is our CBS News election law contributor. And we're also joined by congressional correspondents Scott MacFarlane and Nicole Killion, a double billing. Thanks to all of you for being here. What prescient words by the granddaughter of Martin Luther King just a few hours before that shooting, talking about racially animated shootings taking place across the country. Nicole, here we are 60 years later. Still a lot of challenges.
Yeah, really striking. Of course, that was King's granddaughter. We also heard from Martin Luther King the third, Dr. King's son, and King's wife. But, really being out there on the mall yesterday, 60 years later, it was palpable the amount of frustration and concern there is 60 years later. We talk about how far we have come as a country, and yet for many, particularly in the African-American community, there's a sense that we're still fighting the same battles, whether that's issues of hate crimes and racial violence, whether that's the issue of the rollback of affirmative action, voting rights. So those were some of the concerns articulated at the march yesterday, and also a call to action to continue to keep fighting some of these issues so that one day Dr. King's dream can be realized. That certainly was the message expressed.
A call to action earlier in the show today by former Vice President Mike Pence as well. Robert, I want to talk to you about the former president, President Trump, who is now, he's been booked. He's got a mugshot. He's raising a lot of money using that mugshot. What can you tell us about the legal strategy that his team has right now, particularly after he has changed his legal team in the Atlanta case?
Good to be with you. He has shaken up his legal team in Georgia. What to watch now is the difference between his strategy and the strategy of his co-defendants in this Georgia case, a sprawling prosecution using RICO, racketeering charges, to get this large group of defendants together. Kenneth Chesebro, who authored a memo suggesting alternate electors should be organized by Trump people, he is pushing for a speedy trial. So is Sidney Powell, another co-defendant, who infamously urged Trump to use the government to seize voting machines in the weeks after the 2020 election. But Trump himself is not pushing for a speedy trial because it could have political complications based on our reporting here at CBS News. He could be called as a witness during the fall, just as debates are heating up and the primaries and caucuses loom on the horizon. What you're also watching in Georgia right now is the push by Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, to have this trial move from being a Georgia case at the state Fulton County level to being a federal case. So there are many dynamics at play, multiple legal fronts, all as the political battleground also unfolds.
David, you're a lawyer. Robert just mentioned these co-defendants who are looking for a speedy trial. Why would they want a speedy trial? Why would they want their lawyers to have less time to prepare for this?
Well, they might feel that they already know the facts of this case and they're prepared to go to trial. There might be a variety of tactical reasons they might be moving in that way. And the court's ultimately going to have to decide how to sever all of these defendants and place them into different court cases at different times. Or they could ultimately all be tried together as well if there's some way to reconcile that. But that's something that the lawyers and the clients are obviously discussing and trying to figure out. And this is where we're really going to see the tension between the defendants. These defendants aren't all unified in their claims, and some of them may do better if others of them do worse. And so we're going to see that played out over the next several months as these tactical considerations are made.
We know that Donald Trump does not want a speedy trial in this case or any of the cases. In fact, in D.C. tomorrow, there's going to be a hearing about one of his federal cases where his lawyers have pushed to have the trial in 2026. Are they going to be successful with that motion, Scott?
We will find out tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The judge in Washington, D.C. determines the trial date. And this is a Mars and Venus type of world. The prosecution wants it January 2nd. And as you mentioned, Trump's team wants it 2026. There are some reasons for optimism for Jack Smith going into this hearing. First of all, the early hearings in this case have moved crisply. They've had a quick schedule, and the judge has met all the early deadlines. And the judge has said, if Donald Trump continues with vitriolic social media posts, she's inclined to move the trial date earlier to avoid tainting the jury pool. And there's also the other matter of there are many other cases going on, and this schedule's getting clogged quickly a January or early 2024 trial might suit some purposes. And Nancy, by so many accounts, this case, the one in D.C., is built for efficiency.
I want to ask you, Nicole, about the vitriolic social media posts that Scott just eloquently described. The DA in Atlanta has a different bond agreement with Donald Trump than with any of his other co-defendants. Basically, he has to refrain from attacking fellow witnesses, defendants, on social media or anywhere else. Based on what we know of Donald Trump, which is that he attacks lots of people all the time on social media, how likely is it that he is going to live up to that agreement?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, we also know that he's very verbose on the campaign trail and doesn't really hold back when it comes to going after the prosecutors in this case. But he does have to be very careful. We know that he has a new counsel in Georgia. I would imagine maybe conversations would be had about those parameters to reaffirm them. But certainly the fact that the former president turned around and put his mugshot on social media in such a short period of time, raised some $7.1 million off of that, shows that, you know, he is trying to capitalize off of this case. So it's certainly likely he could go after some of these witnesses, continue to go after prosecutors. But if he's being smart about it and listening to his counsel, hopefully he won't.
A lot of people wondering why a billionaire would have to go through a bail bondsman to post a $200,000 bail.
Well, this is a case where Trump is just trying to get his bearings now in Georgia. He got rid of his lawyer, Drew Finley. But the political consequences of all this, they're watching Trump get a bail bondsman in Georgia, the rest of the field. I was in Milwaukee this week covering the debate, and they're just wondering, is there ever a moment where this all becomes too much? For now, Republican voters are rallying behind Trump. They're buying his mugshot on coffee cups or on T-shirts. But the Republican race, and I was hearing this from candidates and their top strategists out in Milwaukee this week, they're saying that down the line, this could become such a burden on Trump's time, on his political energy, that maybe they start to break through. That's why they're not going at him directly in most cases. You heard some criticism, of course, from Vice President Pence, former Vice President Pence, and former Governor Christie in your conversations today. But beyond those two, they're really hovering around Trump's candidacy, trying to build their own message should there ever be a collapse with Trump. But as we know with the Republican Party, it might never come. They might always stick by Trump.
Certainly gets difficult to schedule campaign rallies if you're expected in court every other day. David, I want to go big picture here because you are an election law expert. And I'm just wondering, because you speak to secretaries of state and election officials in various states all the time, how do they feel now that the former president, many of his aides, have actually been charged with crimes connected to the 2020 election, which, as we know, was not rife with fraud, as the former president continues to argue?
Yeah, it's 1,027 days since that November 2020 election, the most scrutinized election in American history, with more paper ballots, audits, recounts, more pre-election litigation, more post-election litigation confirming the results than ever before. And election officials are still, to this day, almost 3 years after that, having to debunk lies about that election, having to defend their own patriotism, their own service to our country, playing an endless game of whack-a-mole. But I think they are seeing an accountability coming to those who have spread those lies for so long. It's not just the criminal cases. It's also the civil defamation case against Fox News. It's also the disbarment proceedings against people like John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani. There is a sense that accountability is coming, and they want this to play out according to how the legal system is supposed to work. And it is working that way right now. And so what we hope to see is that there is a cooling down, because right now there are tens of millions of Americans who still believe that Republicans and Democrats are conspiring to steal elections, and that's just false, and we know it's false.
A lot of election workers who got death threats, who continue to get death threats because of some of the things that people are saying about the election. David Becker, Robert Costa, Nicole Killion, Scott MacFarlane, thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it.